that it's going to cover any missed holes, and it's also going to protect the sealant underneath from weathering and getting beaten up by sunlight. Again, it's going to be under the panels anyway, but still, the fact that you have a flash in there, it's going to really protect that sealant and make sure that it lasts the full 25-year plus lifespan of the solar system.
So you put the sealant in after you put the main bolt in?
We put the sealant in first, so we start out just with the sealant. What we would have done is, you'll notice that you're only seeing half the flash in here, the other half is under the next row of shingles. So the very first thing you do is actually lift the shingles up. Then you maybe put the flashing in just to test that there's no nails or anything that's going to stop the flashing from going in all the way. And don't worry, we'll cover this again when we're on the roof. I'll demonstrate for everyone. But then you go and you put the sealant around the hole, filling any missed holes. Then you put the flashing in one more time for real this time, and then have someone with the impact driver go and drive that lag screw down. And you'll notice it's driven just to the point where the rubber washer here starts to stick out. That's how you know that you've compressed it all the way without going so far that you break the rubber washer in half. Then there's a cap that goes on top. It's just a kind of a 180-degree turn. And notice the threads on here. You twist that cap on, and that cap not only directly protects and waterproofs that bolt, which also had the rubber gasket on it, it really keeps the water from ever even getting to that gasket because it's a pretty foolproof system. But you'll notice it also has a notched slot in there that allows you to connect the rail with some bolts, and it's got a height adjustment on it, so you can go anywhere in that slot. And if the roof is a little bit uneven, you can correct for that and have the panels be even if the roof is not. Then there's cutting the rails, and this is from a project I did a little while ago, and when we're cutting the rails, we're always wearing safety goggles and we're always wearing ear protection. So I got the dog with he's wearing his ear protection too. He's actually doing better than the homeowner right now who doesn't have his ear protection yet, but everyone else is either wearing the ear muffs or at least ear plugs. Because when you're cutting the aluminum rail with the metal saw, it gets very loud. And you don't want to damage your hearing just to install some solar panels. So there's going to be ear muffs for everyone who's part of the rail cutting. And then the safety glasses are an absolute must because you're going to have shavings flying all over the place. Then once the rails are cut to size, we bring them up to the roof and attach them to the feet. This is again a different style with the L feet, but it's the same idea. You have a notch there and you can set the height and make sure that the rails are even to each other. He's actually using measuring tape to make sure he gets the right height. Then once the rails are in place, you mount the microinverters to the rail or optimizers or whatever you might be using. And then you start to work on the EMT, which stands for electrical metallic tubing. It's otherwise just referred to as conduit. That's what we're going to run the 3 wires through. In fact, in this case, they're going to be AC wires. They're not going to be positive, negative, and ground because everything's getting converted to AC directly on the roof. What it will be is it's going to be line 1, line 2, and ground. And then in this case, the microinverters actually don't need a neutral. The neutral can just go to the monitor rather than up to the individual microinverter. So it's going to be 3 wires still in this conduit. Anyway, to the extent that we have to do any custom shaping of the conduit, there's a conduit bender. That's the orange thing that our volunteers hold in here. And you can basically step on this and you can make a 90-degree or any degree bend you want and make the conduit fit whatever shape you're trying to direct the wires. Then there's going to be mounting the inverter if you have one. In this case, we're just going to be mounting a combiner box as opposed to an inverter, but similar idea. It goes to a wall, and we're going to just mount it to the wall. The combiner box doesn't even really have to go to studs because it's not very heavy, but we will use at least drywall screws to get that attached to the wall. And then again, there's some more conduit that's going to end up going to the service panel. On the roof, we're going to make sure that all the rails are grounded together. So we're going to have in this case, it's kind of showing a ground lug for each rail. Actually, we only have to ground every other rail because every row of panels is going to have two rails, a top rail and a bottom rail. And because they're connected by the panels themselves, the panels create a ground connection from one row of rail to the other row. And anyway, you just have to ground one of the two, and then it effectively will make a ground connection because of the kind of UL rated connectors that we use, the top mounting clamps. They're going to conduct ground to the other rail and the panel itself. You're going to have your EMT in place, so there's going to come a point where we want to actually pull the wires through. So this is our volunteer turned project lead. He actually volunteered on so many installations that we hired him. Anyway, this is Ernest pulling some wire through using a fish tape. So the fish tape is the orange donut here. The one I have is actually green, but basically when I ask for the fish tape, it's going to be hanging from the left wall of my truck, and you just take it out. It's designed to be easily pushed through conduits so that you can pull all the wires back. Again, if you have an inverter, there's some wiring to do in there. And then lifting panels to the roof. I talked about we're not going to climb them up the ladder. We're going to pass them from volunteers on the ground to volunteers on the roof. They're going to get handed up on the lower roof where it's closer to the ground. And so we're probably going to have a couple people on the truck handing it out to a couple of people on the ground who walk it over and then hand it up to a couple of people on the roof. Those panels will get staged. The important thing here is to use good lifting technique. You'll see they have their harnesses in place. And so we want to make sure that whether it's into an anchor or whether someone is holding those harnesses or whatever the case is, we want to make sure that those people, because they're so close to the edge of the roof, that they're somehow secured from falling over. But then you also want to just manage your weight, kind of bend at the knees, that you have most of your weight behind you so that when you pick up the panel, you're not tilting forward. And if you're not particularly confident on the roof, don't be the person grabbing the panels. I'll usually be one of the people grabbing the panels, and then I'll have another volunteer with me. You got a question?
It doesn't seem like they can lift that panel because the panel is taller than them and they're lifting like this. It would seem like you want your hands on the sides of the panel so that
Right.
you can pull it up.
So you're saying, how do they lift it if they're not grabbing it from the sides? So the people on the bottom start holding it on the sides until the point where the people on the roof will usually grab the top of the panel because they'll be leaning way down like this.
Yeah.
And then at some point they lift it away from the people on the ground, and then they're going to transition their grips to the sides where it's more stable. So we're a couple days away from that point. That's going to happen on probably Monday that we do most of the panels. Possibly Sunday, if things go well, we might get some of the panels up, but most likely it's going to be all prep work leading up to Monday where the panels actually go to the roof. It's kind of the last step in the process. And then actually attaching the modules to the rails, so we'll kind of stage them up there, lean against the rails, but then when it comes time to attach them, we need multiple volunteers so that we can have one person or two people holding the panels while someone else is underneath kind of maneuvering the wires and making sure that the wires are not touching the roof where they would be getting scraped or damaged against the rough surface of the roof. So I make sure that we continue to do good wire management when we're doing the last step of putting the panels on. In this case, the panels are going to get plugged into the microinverters, so that'll be the end of any DC circuitry. Is just directly from the panel straight to the microinverter. So very little DC power involved, which does make for a little bit safer system.
This just in this picture here, that's the scariest part of our operation is when someone's standing on the very edge, right over here of the roof. Is there a way of not standing where he would be standing and still?
Because we're going to have even less space than shown there. So in this case, it usually just needs more volunteers. We need to have a couple of people holding it from the top, maybe one person on the side, and then one person underneath wiring it. But you can put the panels all the way to the edge of the roof. You just have to. You obviously can't have someone on the bottom side, so you have to be just a little bit more careful about how you hold and support the panel.
Okay.
When you're moving those panels around, you have to grab by the edges. What happens if you touch the panels themselves. Is that a concern, or are they?
Yeah, so she's asking what happens if you touch the surface of the panels. Ideally, you guys want to be touching just the edges. The surface of the panel is very strong, so it's not going to crack like you might think of solar cells as being very delicate, because they are, but what they're housed in, the frame of the solar panel is very strong, and it can withstand hail and all that, and you're not going to really hurt the panels by touching them, but what will happen is you're going to leave greasy fingerprints on them, which when you have a brand new solar system, you want it to be shiny and new. You don't want it to have all these finger and handprints on them. So I recommend sticking to either touching the edges, or better yet, just wear some gloves so it doesn't take on your fingerprints, but still try to hold it from the edges as much as possible, but don't worry that you're going to break it just because you touched the glass. All right, so back into safety. What are some safety hazards of the solar installation, both general categories and specific concerns? So I'm going to throw it out to the room. What are some general categories of safety concerns? Falling. Electrocution. We have electrical hazards. We have falling hazards.
Back, those muscle strain hazards, I would assume, with lifting.
Yeah, so hazards associated with lifting, straining yourself. Any other? Tripping, yeah. Trips and slips.
We'll be kneeling, right? We'll be kneeling on.
Yeah, we do have knee pads available, by the way. So we have gloves and we have knee pads available. So just ask for them. I usually keep them in the large DeWalt bag with all the power tools. So they should be on the roof and accessible to everyone. So just to talk about it in terms of general categories, basically gravity, which covers people falling from ladders or rooftops, or things falling on people. When it comes to things falling on people, we do have hard hats, so if you're going to be spending a lot of time on the ground, you might want to just wear a hard hat, because things do start sliding. This is a steep enough roof that if you set something down, it might start sliding. And again, you don't want to go chasing after something, because you don't want to be the thing falling off the roof. Let it fall, yell out heads up, so that people on the ground know that something's heading their way, but don't chase tools, even if it's a power tool. If you can maybe grab it with your foot, just don't even try to chase it, because if it's going to fall, it's going to fall. I've had DeWalt tools fall off, and they make it just fine, so that's why I endorse the DeWalt tools, because they can take a beating. But you guys are the most important part. The tools can be replaced, but you guys cannot. The other general category is electricity. So we already talked about the overhead wiring. It bears mentioning again. I can't say it enough. We're not going to see it on this installation, but if you're on another installation, I want you guys to be trained to just fear those overhead wires. And then you got breaker panel wiring. So you need to have the proper training to know what things are safe to touch and not safe to touch in there. You might see me getting my hands all in there and touching a lot of stuff, but don't assume just because I'm in there working on it that the power is dead. I might be working on it live. And anyway, there's no situation where we have the volunteers doing the electrical wiring. We leave that to the project lead. You guys can be there watching and you can ask questions, but it's a little bit more hands-off. And then there's the solar panel wiring. So I mentioned before that if you're doing a DC system, you want to really be mindful of the order of operations and when you connect the solar panels together, because as you start to connect them in series, you start to accumulate really high voltage, not with the microinverters, but with regular DC systems. Nowadays, most of these systems are going to have rapid shutdown incorporated, which adds a layer of safety, but still you just want to be aware that you should not be connecting panels in series, positive to negative. You should not be making those connections without the project lead's direction, because what can happen is you can get all the wires connected together, and if the project lead doesn't realize that even the last connection has been made, you might be treating it like it's an open circuit, but in fact be exposed to 400 or 500 volts of DC power while he's trying to do wiring at either the inverter or the rapid shutdown box. And then just electrical equipment in general, be aware of whether it's overhead wires or whether it's the service panel. Just be aware of the electrical hazards. Then you got the tools themselves, hand tools, power tools. We're going to be doing a little hands-on exercise with the power tools in a minute, where everyone's going to go to a table and read the instruction manual on the power tools and then report back to the group at large. But even hand tools, you want to make sure that you know how to use them. If you have questions, ask the project lead, but also be aware of any tools just lying on the roof and becoming a tripping hazard. And again, with the relatively steep roof that we have here, they can also go sliding. So kind of going back